This is a production of Cornell University.
So I really appreciate your being here. Some of you are aware that I'm retiring in June, and so this is something of a retrospective seminar. I have been a senior extension associate and a senior lecturer here in horticulture, and this feels like self-indulgence to me. I have not given a presentation like this in a while. I don't tend to lecture when I'm teaching, haven't used PowerPoint much. So to have a seminar that focuses on me and my story has made me a little anxious, I must admit. At the same time, it's been a real pleasure to spend some time with reflection. And when Carlin so generously reached out to me back in January and asked if I would do this, my first inner reaction was kind of a groan. And then I thought, this is really an opportunity. This is going to be a lot of fun. And here are some of the questions that I found myself thinking about. What drew me to horticulture? What are the primary elements of my story and what are its chapter titles? Who are the great influencers, those people in our lives that are so important? And as I'm preparing for this vital task of moving on, what does that look like? What kind of footprint do I want to leave? So it has been a really sweet time of reflection, and I'm, again, appreciative for the opportunity. So I'll just begin with a chapter one, the early days here. I grew up in a working class family, and my brother and I were the first to go to college. And I was pretty clueless. I really didn't know what I was doing. I had a really inspiring high school biology teacher, Steve Austin, who, if he hadn't been teaching biology, I probably would be in whatever field he had taught at that time. But I decided to major in biology, and because my high school guidance counselor encouraged me to apply to Russell Sage College, I did. And I ended up going there because I got the biggest financial aid package. It cost me $500 to go to Russell Sage. But it was also a private women's college in an urban area. I grew up in a working class family in an urban area, and I grew up in a rural area, and it was a shock. It was not such a good fit. I just found myself a little bit lost there, even as academically it was fine. And one February day, I thought, I've got to figure this thing out. It's just not a really good fit. So I went for a long walk and thought, on this walk, I'm going to figure out what comes next. And so I happened to stumble into a flower shop filled with plants, filled with greenery. And I looked around and said, all right, this will work. Walked back, walked into my advisor's office and said, I want to transfer to a college that has horticulture. And that was it. Based on that one flash of insight, I sometimes wonder if I hadn't walked down that block, what would have happened? And he said, there's only one institution for you. And I applied to Cornell, and wow, felt like it was a sense of homecoming. I was in then a tiny iteration of what is now horticulture, called floriculture and ornamental horticulture, and found my home, found my happy place. Loved the university, loved my major, the people. Dr. Robert Maurer was my advisor, and just felt really cared for here. And at the first party that I went to, and we went to a lot of parties, I met my beloved Scott, who's here, my husband. He was then my best friend, and later we got married. And so that was, again, another fortuitous moment on the Cornell campus. I did take a year off and spent it in Olympic National Park, worked out there, what we now call a gap year. We didn't have that language then, but just actually ran out of money. I put myself through school, thought I'd better slow things down, took a gap year and spent it out there, and then came back for my senior year. Had a wonderful senior year. I had an individual study project. I actually wrote the first guide to sustainable agriculture resources at Cornell. It was then a new thing. This would have been in like 1982. And really enjoyed it. And I had a great job at the Center for Local Food and Agriculture. And this guy in this image was my supervisor. He was a graduate student. He was a really caring supervisor. Anybody recognize him? He's in this room. That's Craig Kramer.
Oh.
So Craig and I go that far back. He was my my supervisor, he would loop around later. His wife delivered one of our children, and then later again when he came back as when he came in as a communication specialist. So Craig and I have been working together for some time. When I graduated, we moved to Saratoga for Scott's job. And I got a call one day through a connection that he had. Somebody said, Susan Beebe, an extension educator here, is going for 6 months on maternity leave. How would you like to fill her position? And I said, I'd love to. Ended up being there for 3 years. At that time, I had 3 things. Some of you know in cooperative extension, you're often juggling. I'm looking at one person who knows that really well here in the audience. I was in 4-H plant science. I worked with all of the commercial fruit growers and also managed the Master Gardener Volunteer Program. So that was wonderful because I got a little bit of a taste of everything. I was there about 3 years. And at that time, Marvin Pritz and I actually started working the same year. We started working in 1984, and he would come up and meet with the fruit growers. And at the end of that period of time, he said, you know, I have a position here as a technician if you're interested. So we packed up and moved back to Ithaca, and that would begin chapter 2, berry crops and children's gardens. So I worked as Marvin's technician for 3 years, another 3-year stint. There you see Marvin with some pretty short shorts there on the far end of that line. Looking pretty short there.
Are you in that picture?
I am. I'm right in the middle. I'm actually right. I'm right here. I know. And you know what's really funny? We were talking about this yesterday. Look at Allison. I don't know how many of you know Marvin's wife. She looks photoshopped in. She's not changed a bit. She looks exactly like that now. So I worked for 3 years at the Cornell orchards, primarily caring for Marvin's research plots at a point at which he was so active that it was like being a commercial grower. And that was one of the benefits of this time. I remembered thinking if I needed to grow commercially, I could. There was so much growth. We actually planted Blueberry Hill during that time, again, dating myself wildly there. But I also discovered that much as I really appreciated the opportunity, research maybe wasn't my inclination. And Marvin really recognized this, started inviting me to do more and more of his extension presentations. And then at the end of this time period, another position opened up in what was then another iteration of horticulture, and I was invited to take it. And it was in the children's garden arena. It was then called 4-H plant science. So I slid into another position there and spent the 90s decade really enjoying working in the area of a lot of extension visits, a lot of workshops, actively engaged with the American Hort Society, doing a lot of publications and educational resource development, really starting to feel like I'm really finding my niche here. I love that time period. I've got a little icon in the lower left to remind me to mention Epcot. There was an exciting project. 5 of us who were considered children's gardening experts from around the nation were invited to come to Epcot and design the model children's garden, which was a fascinating process. And what fascinated me as much as this children's garden that we were developing was that the woman who facilitated this design charrette was really good at what she did. And that's when I started noticing the difference between giving a talk and facilitating a workshop. I actually got in touch with her and said, how do you do what you do? It was so seamless. And I think the seeds of facilitation were planted there. Incidentally, that's our son, Jacob, who is in the lower right-hand corner with his friend out in the conservatory. He's actually on the Zoom call now. Give a shout out to him for joining us. He's now 32, so he's changed a bit since then too. And at the end of that decade, I went back for graduate study in community development and education, and came back to the department in a new role as a senior extension associate. Later, I would add being a senior lecturer. And Lori Brewer, we hired her. She was then Lori Bushway, and just developed a lifelong friendship in her, and we changed 4-H plant science from now calling it Cornell garden-based learning, which seemed more inclusive of the work we did. By the way, if you haven't seen Lori in a while, she is thriving and healthy, and that's actually a current picture of her in the lower right, and she is ringing the bell. You can't see the bell. She's just completed the Saranac 6 hikes in the Adirondacks. Some of you are nodding, you're familiar with that. So it was just such a joy to work with Lori. And that really began then the next chapter, which I've titled Creative Possibilities. I felt as if I just had this brain explosion around the possibilities in exciting and interest in people in our amazing discipline, finding all these different avenues for engaging people in horticulture, things that maybe we hadn't done before, such as the Art of Horticulture course. Just really trying to think of ways in for people who might not think about our discipline, but wanting to engage them. And it was just, I think of this time as just this kind of brain explosion, doing a lot of projects on campus, and also really starting to engage in a number of collaborations with people. There's Frank in the upper right. He's here in the room today, for those of you who are on Zoom. We designed a number of sod sofas here on campus. We did them in our extension system as well, and just had so much fun engaging in living sculpture. Imagine that you haven't learned about grass and you get to do it by building a sod sofa. Just such a joy. Also developed a series of distance courses, including 3 distance courses in botanical illustration. I've passed the torch to Sonia Williams. She's not now teaching them again. Thank you. Shout out to Sonia, who is on our Zoom call today with us, and another course in Introduction to Garden Design. So starting to stir a number of pots here, teaching on campus, distance learning, and then of course an extension program. And you can just see these amazing works of art created by students. What a pleasure. There's also a funny story from this time. I remember, again, just having this sense of brain fever, like all these ideas about ways to excite an interest in horticulture. And I flew into Bill Miller's office. At that time, we were engaged in a bulb project with the Dutch growers, and went into Bill Miller's office and said, Bill, here's this thing we've got to do. It would be so much fun to plant a big bulb labyrinth, like this giant bulb labyrinth. Like, just imagine how beautiful it would be. And if you know Bill, he was sitting there just looking at me, just kind of looking at me. And I'm like, can you picture it? Like a bulb labyrinth? It's bulb labyrinth, huh? Bulb labyrinth, okay. You're talking about a bulb labyrinth, right? So he picks up the phone and calls Ron White, who was then the manager at Bluegrass Lane. Hey, Ron, I got to tell you something funny. Okay, I got to tell you. I got Marcia Eames-Sheavly sitting here in my office. You know what a pain in the ass she is, right? Okay, well, get this. Here's what she's talking about. She's talking about building a bulb labyrinth. I know. He's laughing, and I'm starting to feel so incredibly embarrassed. And the next thing he said was, where do you think we could site this thing? So here's another beautiful project. Actually, Bill did this with his students. You can see him. He's there in the upper right. And you can see this image in the left or the right side. Upper left is Bill. On the right side of the screen, you'll see Christine Haddical frolicking through that bulb labyrinth. She's somebody that worked in our program for a really short period of time, but had an incredibly big impact. You'll be seeing some more images of her. Again, a period of a lot of activity and extension. Here are, just a handful of the projects that we did with young people, trying to think about different ways in dig art, cultivating creativity in the garden. This was one that Christine developed. Living sculpture, discovering our food system, youth grow, and all sorts of ways in for young people to experience horticulture. Also engaged with a research project around 2006 to 2008, which involved looking at the power dynamics between young people and adults. And one of the findings from that time, which was fascinating to us, is there is no correlation between gardening activity and an interest in gardening among young people. The correlation is between between decision making and an interest in gardening. So if you want to excite an interest in young people, you're better off engaging them in the process. You can garden all summer with them and tell them how to weed and water. In fact, you might kill their interest. So this was pretty exciting news to us. Went on to teach a host of courses. I don't even know if this is a complete list. Kept Leah really busy with the 4940 courses. Again, just so much joy in the work of teaching. I included graduate teaching experience because I came to think of our graduate students as teaching apprentices, put a lot of energy into working closely with them and spending time with them, meeting weekly and talking about the craft of teaching and learning. So much joy. Also went through a period of applying for and receiving funds from the Cornell Council for the Arts for doing a number of projects here on campus. This is a Gandhi and grass exhibit that was in the, Frank is laughing, was in the Mann Library foyer. What a wild thing. I sometimes think we had a lot of nerve. You know, we just had this idea of creating this huge 12 by 12 by 12 black velvet box and projecting an image of Gandhi on a huge panel of grass with the idea that it would burn in, and we had peepholes, people could watch the process. It worked okay. We kind of petted the grass in different directions to make it work. There's Christine Horticulture there again in the lower left of the right-hand panel, another project she was involved with. We had rooted out on the on Live Slope in bulbs and brought Patrick Dougherty to campus for a week of messenger lecturers and then doing a huge willow sculpture at Ithaca Children's Garden. Also, another one of Christine's influences was encouraging a partnership in Southern Belize. And I would go down there 7 times with students to teach there a number of courses, mostly focused around experiential garden-based learning in Belize, but not limited to that. We also had a tropical plants extravaganza and another number of other courses, but that just proved to be such a rich partnership. Really struck up a strong partnership with Plenty Belize there. And it was a model that was based on mentoring. We had, and here are just a few of them. We had many mentors from Cooperative Extension, from campus and the community that came on these trips so that I would be spending my time kind of managing the students and the partnership, and they would provide student support and their content expertise as well. You'll see some familiar faces, Marvin and Leah, there's Fiona Doherty, Grant Thompson, Charles Malone and Cooperative Extension, Elizabeth Gabriel and Christine Horticulture. And up at the top on the zip line is Abib Palma. He is somebody that we worked there every time we went. And so we worked hard and played hard. We had one day that we would spend doing something like going to the caves or a zip line or something like that. It was just such a rich time. In fact, I would say one of my favorite courses that I ever taught was a course called Healing Plants and the People Who Use Them. And the way it came about was that our partner there said, we have 6 shamans who are very worried about passing along their knowledge to people. And what they would like to do is to work with your students to document their plants in English and Latin so that they have it for their record because they're worried about losing this. So we ended up, it's so funny, I got funding and then started to write the syllabus and realized I actually don't know a lot about this topic. So I invited 3 graduate students in anthropology, plant biology, and horticulture, and they provided, again, the mentoring and the support and also a deep content expertise. And we ended up with a big focus on healing. We included Heartstone Herbal School in our preparation. And one of the students even went so far as to say, whoops, I never thought that the the healing that would happen in this course would be my own. It was such a powerful, powerful experience. By the way, I didn't say at the beginning, this is going to be about no more than about a half an hour, and then I'm going to turn it over to you and we'll have a conversation. Not going to be talking that much longer. Chapter 4, this brings us to chapter 4, Courage and Renewal. At a point in the 2000s, in the early to mid 2000s, our hearts broke. And this is something that happens to every human being that I have ever known. We encountered some family patterns that were challenging, even some generational trauma, stuff we needed to deal with. And it was a really, really hard time. One of our sons also had his best friend since babyhood died, and that was shattering. And then not long after that, 3 of our remaining parents died within a little more than a year of one another. And it was so hard. And I'm looking at you and guessing that some of you know what that is in whatever way that you've experienced difficulty. And if you don't know what I mean, then I'll reassure you that you'll have your moment. It happens as a human being on this earth. And I am so grateful for the various kinds of support from that time. But one of them was Parker J. Palmer's work. Parker Palmer is an educator, author, and activist. I had practically memorized one of his books. It's called The Heart of Higher Education. Also read The Courage to Teach, Let Your Life Speak, Healing the Heart of Democracy. And along in that time period, I had an opportunity to be on retreat with him. It was through what is now the Einhorn Center. It was when we had this big gift coming to the university, and a number of folks in central administration wanted to pull some people together to reflect together, but do it in a way that was spacious and heart-centered. And due to a connection with the Einhorns, Parker agreed to come and give a university retreat. He would do another one later on. And within 15 minutes of being in that room, I was thinking, this is something different. I don't know what this is, but I want more of it. It was just so different. And he used language like, which really rung true with me at that time. He said, you know, all of our hearts are going to break. And the heart that is brittle will shatter. But the heart that is supple expands, and we grow larger from our difficulty. And I thought, I want more of that. So I went to a number of these programs and would eventually prepare. It was about a 3-year process as a Circle of Trust facilitator prepared by the Center for Courage and Renewal. And it's been life-changing. I've integrated it into pretty much everything that I do. Their tagline is nurturing deep integrity and relational trust, building the foundation for a more loving, equitable, and healthy world. And to engage in that kind of wholehearted work in the workplace was really, really exciting to me. I would go on then to develop an inner life of teaching and leadership, opportunity. It's a cohort building experience for faculty and staff across the university here on our campus. I led that 6 times. It's now in the capable hands of other people as I prepare to go. And again, just found it to be really life-altering work. Some of you picked up the handouts. Some of you on Zoom got them electronically. And you'll see that there are touchstones for how we engage with one another. And there's the practice of asking open and honest questions. That's bedrock to this work, as is the use of some unusual, perhaps for some, teaching devices in our work, such as poetry, wisdom stories, and other things that help us to drop from our analytical minds into our hearts and bodies. You'll see I included a poem on aging, which really spoke to me, offering a different way of thinking about eldering here at the university. So again, if you have an opportunity to read those, you might another time. I don't think it's a coincidence that because of my own incredible, deep mentoring experience, I was actually assigned a mentor, and I worked with her for 2 years. I actually went through a grieving process when it was over, put more energy into that than I did my graduate study by a mile. That because of the influence, I became interested in mentoring initiatives, started the plant science peer mentoring program here in the plant sciences, and also worked with Mike Bishop and Sue Merkel to begin a mentoring initiative across the university. I've been working recently with Sophia Lloyd and Nishi Dupa for developing a woman of color mentoring initiative at Cornell. One of our elephants in the room is that women of color do not stay at Cornell. I have been heartbroken at the number of colleagues who have left. And so this was in response to this, to think if we had a mentoring initiative that was supportive and provided deep connection, might we support better these women of color? We've just launched that starting this month, actually, or in February, and we're so hopeful that it might make a difference. And then again, informal mentoring, formal mentoring, I'm on mentoring committees, and a number of people I've met through the Inner Life cohort have invited more of that kind of conversation. And as an elder, as somebody late career, I've really welcomed it. Another thing that Courage and Renewal programs gave me the courage to do was to look at the wounds of whiteness, healing the wounds of whiteness, the inner work of facing racism. I would not have had the courage to engage in that work without the ballast of the background of Courage and Renewal. And again, I've worked closely with people in recent years, such as Eduardo Gonzalez in our extension system, my very dear friend Jamila Walida Simon. One of the things I've learned from them that I really want to name is there's something amazing about the way, and some of you here were at the Soulfire Farm workshop that we hosted, about the way in which they hold the gravitas of the work with kind of joy and relief of working together, putting our shoulders into it. I always end up feeling better after I've worked with them. Like it's not a grim duty. It's a joy to be in it together. And I've appreciated that. Worked closely with Anna Bartel and the Einhorn Center, doing things like we've been engaged in work such as presenting a Fumbling Toward Equity panel for the Inclusive Excellence Summit. And working with Violet and Anu on a Reconnecting with Purpose initiative for farm and food system change makers, a retreat series that bookends peer learning circles. Working with Melina Ivanchikova, who is in the upper left of this Zoom shot on teaching and learning in the diverse classroom this past summer. Again, I don't know that I would have found my way into this work and felt grounded enough to engage in it without the work of Courage and Renewal. And speaking of collaboration, I have to name the joy of working with Lori and Ashley, who are here in this room today in Cornell Garden-Based Learning. Ashley and I co-lead Cornell Garden-Based Learning. Lori is a staff member that we've hired who has just completed the most exciting Project Sow Seeds of Wonder Food Gardening with Justice in Mind curriculum. We're very excited about that. So wonderful colleagues. So I'm going to pause here briefly before drawing to a close and just name some patterns that I want to speak to. In putting this together, I think I'm a pattern seeker and found myself just reflecting on what am I noticing in all of these images? Well, for one thing, I'm noticing there's so much beauty. There's so much beauty in these slides. They're just gorgeous. I mean, the faces of people and the work that we've done, and what a privilege to work in this discipline. I'm also pretty staggered by the collaborations. I mean, I've known that I've been inclined in that direction, but to see them all of these, again, wonderful faces and the joy in working together, it's really been a pleasure to witness that and to pick that out as a pattern. Another pattern that I would name, I don't know if you noticed, but I didn't apply for anything. And I just find that very interesting. I've kind of stumbled in. I mean, I was invited to go to the first college, and I was invited to come to Cornell, and I was invited to, it's a really fascinating thing to feel like kind of right place in the right time and saying, okay, that sounds good. Walking down the street, horticulture sounds good. It's really interesting to me. There's another pattern that I want to name. In January, somebody told me about the work of Catherine Price, who is a researcher who studies fun, an F word we don't use at the university very much. And she has found that in her research, there are three primary components of fun that she would name that are central to enjoyment. One is a sense of playfulness and lightheartedness. Two is a powerful sense of connection with others. And three is a sense of flow, of being in the flow. And does that ever characterize a number of the things that I've shared with you? These are students in our Seed to Supper class, yes, having fun over in the Pounder's Garden as they're learning. So it has been a joy. It's been a lot of fun. We don't always talk about that, but important to name. So with that, I'm going to start drawing to a close. Chapter 5, the sunrise after the sunset. What comes next after being, if I count the time I was an undergraduate, I've been here 43 years. I took a year in the Olympic Mountains and 3 years in Saratoga, but that's a long time to be in one place. So what comes next? For one thing, I am eager to spend time in my garden. I've been a garden-based learning educator my whole life, and I do gardening on the weekends like a weekend warrior. So I am really eager to know, what it is to get up on a Wednesday morning and not have that sense of the pressure of like 7:30 is coming my way and it's time to go to work. This is actually what our garden will look like. Oh gosh, maybe about 3 or 4 weeks there to the left, and on the right, you'll see a salad harvested. Scott built a hoop house. I was ready to marry him all over again after that. And this is a late season salad from our hoop house. Yes, that's a fig in there too. Really eager to do more of this. I'm an artist, and just spending more spacious time painting. In recent years, I've really gotten into botanical ecoprinting, and I'm actually selling these. You can see these silk scarves. Just want to wallow in it again, not have that feeling of like something I have to pack in on a weeknight or a weekend. I'm definitely going to be doing more with Courage and Renewal programs, possibly here, but definitely outside the university as well. And I'm going to take a leap here in as soon as the application process opens for 2023 to apply to an eco chaplaincy program. I saw it online and I felt this like ripple of recognition go through me. It's 13 months long. It has a week or maybe 8-day residency. And you can see environmentally based spiritual care. I look at those words and man, my heart starts beating faster. The histories of environmentalism, the skills around spiritual counseling, nature-based ritual, more than human storytelling. I don't know what that is, but I want to find out. What really I find compelling is practices, rituals, and ceremonies for ministering ecological death, dying, grief, and loss. We talk about climate change and we think about the science around preparing for that, but sometimes we don't talk about the profound grieving and loss that people feel. And we also don't talk that much about the roots of it, which are things like greed and apathy and ignorance and too much wanting and too much looking for convenience. And I, want to look in my own heart there around those things. So I'm quite excited about this. Cross your fingers that I get accepted. So I want to close with, here's what we'll do. I want to offer some gratitudes. Of course, I have to have some questions for reflection for you. Look at students who know that really well. Of course, you would expect that. And then we'll chat for a little bit. And then about 10 minutes after, I have a 3-minute video that I'd like to show before we go out. It will be about a project called Turf Work that we did out. It was a more than 1 acre sized piece of earth art that we did out at Bluegrass Lane. Another Rossi collaboration there. So we'll close with that. So how do you offer gratitudes for 38 years of work? There's no way that I could do that without leaving anyone out. But I just want to say briefly, there is no way that I could have done what I've done in terms of it being kind of an unconventional approach to horticulture without supportive leadership. There's no way. in another horticulture department? I kind of don't think so. I don't see that happening elsewhere. I don't think it would even happen in other departments here. That kind of openness to, yeah, that sounds good. Are you serious? Did you hear me? Are you sure you know what I'm hoping to do here? So I want to acknowledge, Marvin in particular, and then Steve and Justine, who have followed and really upheld that same spirit of openness. I want to acknowledge my incredible colleagues all across the university and in our extension system, and our amazing students. We are so lucky to do the work that we do here, as well as I want to name the Inner Life cohort participants, a real rich, it's a way of getting to know people all from across the university. It's been such a joy. I don't want to go down the dangerous path of mentioning particular people because I might leave somebody out, but there are 3 that I have to mention. I mean, I want to acknowledge my husband, Scott, and I want to name our kids, Jake and Will, who have been just, again, champions and supporters and enthusiasts of this work. And I'm so grateful. Again, not something that everybody gets to enjoy, that kind of support. I want to acknowledge Craig Kramer, all of those beautiful images, or many of them, because he shows up and takes shots of our work. And it's so much fun. I mean, a lot of people don't have that gift. And I certainly want to acknowledge Marvin. I quite literally wouldn't be standing here, for one thing, without his invitation. And I've also come to think of him, he's my brother from another mother, and really appreciate, we've had a long co-creative career together. So much to be grateful for, so much gratitude. So with that, I'm going to pause, take a breath. It's the longest I've talked for quite a long time. And these, they're not showing up real well on that screen. It looks like you can see them there, good. So I would invite you to think about what drew you to horticulture. What are the primary elements of your story? And what would you call your chapter titles? It's been fun thinking about this. Who are your great influencers? It's so helpful to pause periodically and think, again, for me, all the way back to my parents, who instilled a love of gardening in me, and my high school biology teacher. Who are they for you? And if you are late career, as I am, I'm like very late career, as you prepare for the vital task of moving on, what does that look like? How do you age with wisdom and courage and grace? And what comes next for you? What kind of footprint do you want to leave behind? So I will just open it up for comments and questions. For if this has triggered something in you that you might want to share, then I'd invite that. Again, we've got a lovely 5 minutes or so here, and just welcome anything that you'd like to offer. And thank you if you've been hanging in on Zoom. Really, really appreciate your being with us here today. Finally gotten in the habit of giving you eye contact, appreciating that you're here with us. Any questions, comments, reflections on your own experience? Yes.
I have a question. Can you speak more about the circle of trust activity that you mentioned, like what it does and like how to implement that?
So the circle of trust methodology is characterized by it's literally a circle if it's in person, and there are small group, individual reflection, and large group reflection around things that are important to us as people. So for example, there are circles that explore leadership through the lens of what is it like to draw on our inner selves as we are, who are we as leaders on the inside, and how do our core values inform our work? There might be circles around aging. One of the things I'm really interested in is a circle approach to, it's a dream I'm confiding in. I'm realizing confiding in a large group of people is a funny thing to do, but I'm curious about working with aging faculty around the question of who am I now and who am I becoming? And having opportunities to meet with others over, imagine a 3-day period, and then meeting monthly in peer learning circles with a closing opportunity. So one of the things that circles of trust, and again, it's character, we communicate with one another in a certain way, it's confidential, we don't give advice to one another. but it really often opens up something in us that was unexpected, and we're in a space in which that's invited. It's probably the best thing I can say. Marvin, you were in it. You want to say anything about your experience in it?
I think the best thing about it is we have very few venues at the university to talk about things other than our research or sometimes our teaching. Even then, sometimes it's questionable. But it's a place where you can go and just talk about what you've been thinking about, what's inside you, hearing from other people's, what they want to see, their promises, their aspirations. And so and we just don't have a venue like that. So that's why it's really, I think, valuable to get together with people that you don't necessarily know and talk about this thing. You find out you have a lot in common with other people, that you all have these inner desires to kind of break out of your shell. And I'll follow with a question. You talked about courage renewal sort of at the end, but I've seen you have courage from the very beginning and to break out and push the boundaries and the parameters that we're sometimes locked into with our academic programs and our rigor and all that. And so I guess my question is, what words of advice do you have to people here to kind of go beyond that comfort zone in an academic environment and push the limits a little bit? Because I know everybody here probably has that little bit of creativity or that desire to do something a little bit different, but we feel constrained sometimes by the culture and all. Do you have any advice, or how did you get that courage from the very beginning to like keep pushing the limits?
So thank you, Marvin. And for those of you who are on Zoom, I don't know if you could hear Marvin. I'll just reiterate briefly he was talking, they could hear fine. Okay, great. That's also buying me a little time to think about an answer. On a given day, of course, we would answer a question differently, right? But what's coming to my mind right now, and I will trust it, is, of all things, a Cornell leadership opportunity. We had a 360 where you get 360 feedback. And I was sitting down with a coach who was going to give it 360. That means people that I've invited, my colleagues, my supervisor, people were giving me feedback. And then you sit down, it's kind of tender. You're receiving open and honest feedback. But what the coach said to me was, you have tremendous personal power. I think you should use it. And I think it planted in me, and I probably used it before then, because this wasn't until the it was in the 2000s. But I guess in terms of guidance, I would say we all have personal authority. We all have inner authority. It isn't dependent on our positions. I've done a lot as a non-tenure track faculty member, and I think it's from drawing on that sense of, I think, connecting with our interior. What am I about? What do I believe in? And having that give me the courage to speak up and to do what I am here to do. In a way, another way of looking at it, if you have gifts that you and you alone have in this world and you don't use them, what is that? I think there could be tremendous regret at the end of our lives. So I think it's what we're here for. I mean, tomorrow I might answer that differently, but trust yourselves, align yourselves with the people who foster that trust in you. That's another thing you asked about courage and renewal. There's a lot. It's a trustworthy space where you are connecting with your inner gifts. It is never about navel gazing or, the sort of me and myself absorbed. It's like you get your ballast so you can get back out there to do the work that you are meant to do. That's how I'd answer that now. Maybe one more question or comment, if this stirred something up in you that you want to just name about your own interest in horticulture, your own passion for it, what brought you here? Anything else? Yes, Jonah.
As you look into this eco-chaplain work, it definitely, to me, feels like something that makes a lot of sense for you. What are you drawing from specifically as you prepare to maybe enter that chapter? Do you have any specific models or inspirations that you're thinking of? Because to me, it reminds me very much of like work Ram Dass did in hospice, being sort of a guide for people trying to reconcile with some of the deepest questions we face. So I'm wondering what you're drawing from there.
You know, if I'm really honest, I don't know yet. I have a very dear friend. It's someone who's actually on this Zoom call that once went through a similar program. And I said, what are you going to do with it? She said, I don't know. In fact, she might have said something like, I'm surprised you would ask me that. Now I know what she means. I don't know, Jonah. I guess that's another response to Marvin's question is I trust my intuition. And again, I trust that ripple that went through my body when I saw that description and thought that is the next step for me. And I don't fully know. And you know, I feel like all the markers are leading in this direction. I think one thing we're all going to die. And I think it could be helpful to have a skill set and being present to people that I love as we age and head in that direction. So that's another thing, but I don't really fully know yet. It's a wonderful question. Thank you. Well,
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.